Welcome back to Giselle Tech TV. This is the start of a new series, JavaScript After Work or JS After Work, because after work pretty much every day I've been reviewing the fundamentals of JavaScript, so I decided to turn this into video form. So feel free to work along with me, and I'll leave the links of what I'm working on in the description. This has been part of 100 days of code. I completed one round of 100 days of code, but now I'm completing a round 2 of 100 days. And for this round, I'll mainly be focused on JavaScript, and you can feel free to check out my progress in this spreadsheet. The link is in the description. I'm going through the MDN Web Docs JavaScript course. Each section has different concepts to learn about, and recently I completed the JavaScript First Steps section. And this section covers the basics like variables, numbers and operators, strings, string methods, and arrays. Also, each section has learning exercises as well as projects or assessments, so I'll be working on the exercises and projects in this series. In this video, I'll be working through Test Your Skills strings. There are 4 different strings exercises, and the tests are based on everything covered in JavaScript First Steps. So they're basic exercises to practice this learning. As a quick note, I also published a blog post recently where I wrote about some other practice exercises that I completed from this module, and you can check out the link in the description. So that was a bit of context on what I'm working on. So I'll now start the exercises and test your skills strings. Here is the first exercise, strings 1, and it gives a description of the task as well as the steps to take to complete the task. And then below that, there is a live code editor to add the code to display the result here. But for each exercise, I pulled out only the necessary parts of the code from MDN Sandbox, as I prefer to test in my own separate environment. So here on the left, I'll be testing out each solution. So what I've done in this exercise is I pulled out the variable quote start, and I pasted it here into my code editor, and then I'll continue to make the changes here. It says in our first strings task, we start off small. You already have half of a famous quote inside a variable called quote start, and I have that on the left. So quote start is equal to the half of a famous quote. Don't judge each day by the harvest you reap. And it says we would like you to 1, look up the other half of the quote and add it to the example inside a variable called quote end. So what I'll do is copy what's inside of this variable quote start so that I can find the other half of the quote. And it looks like this is a quote by Robert Louis Stevenson. Don't judge each day by the harvest you reap, but by the seeds that you plant. So I'll need to grab the other part of this quote, but by the seeds that you plant. And I'll need to create a new variable called quote end and store the other part of the quote into the new variable. So I'll do that. And then next it says concatenate the 2 strings together to make a single string containing the complete quote. Save the result inside a variable called final quote. So I'll create a new variable called final quote. And then I'll use the template literal format. And the first variable is quote start. And the second is quote end. And then that will join those 2 variables together. The next part says you'll find that you get an error at this point. Can you fix the problem with quote start so that the full quote displays correctly? So what I'll do is go back to the code and I'll console log final quote to see what's actually happening once we run this code. So I'll run the code. And the error message, syntax error, unexpected identifier. The problem here is the way the word don't is formatted. So if I go back to the code, the string is set up using single quotes. So you can see them here at the start and the end of the string. You can see the single quotes. So using this character for don't will not work unless it's reformatted properly. There's a couple of ways I can fix it so that the character is recognized as text. So one way is to use double quotes for the string instead. So I can update the string to use double quotes. And now you can see that that character is being recognized as text instead of code. So now I'm going to rerun the code, and again I'm console logging final quote, which should print out both of these variables combined as one string, and it does. Another thing I can do is use a method called escaping by putting a backslash just before the character. So here, right before the single quote or the apostrophe, I can just put a backslash, and that will format the string properly to allow the use of that character so that it doesn't cause any errors. And now if I run the code again, it prints out my quote. So I've completed the testing in my code editor, but if I did want to go and test on MDN Sandbox, I can just copy and paste what I have in my code editor into their sandbox here. So it says add your code here, and I'll just copy what I have here, and we can see that it prints out the quote. Also, as a note, below this there is a link for downloading the starting point for this task, and it's a link to their GitHub where they have the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So that's another option to grab that and put it in a code editor or a sandbox like CodePen. However, I've just been pulling out the JavaScript portion and simply testing the output in my editor here. Moving on to the next task, which is strings 2. In this task, you are provided with two variables, quote and substring, which contain two strings, and I already have these copied over into my text editor. This first variable, quote, is set to I do not like green eggs and ham. I do not like them, Sam, I am. And then the second variable, substring, is set to green eggs and ham, which now I'm hungry doing this, but we shall continue. It says we would like you to retrieve the length of the quote and store it in a variable called quote length. So I'm going to go over and create a new variable, quote length. And it says retrieve the length of the quote. So I'm going to set up the new variable's value to target the quote variable. And then I'm going to use the length method to get the length of the string stored in the quote variable. And then I'm going to console log the quote length variable to see what the length is. And we can see here that the length is 63. Next, it says find the index position where substring appears in quote and store that value in a variable called index. So I'm going to create a new variable, index. And I'm going to set up this new variable's value to target the quote variable again. And then I'm going to use the index of method to get the index number of where the substring, which is green eggs and ham, is stored within the quote variable. And I'm going to insert the substring variable in the parentheses of this method. And this is how I'm able to locate what I'm looking for in the quote string, which is the particular value stored in the substring variable. So I'm going to console log the index variable to see what the index is, and we can see that it's 14. Next, it says use a combination of the variables you have and available string properties / methods to trim down the original quote to I do not like green eggs and ham and store it in a variable called revised quote. So I'm going to create the new variable revised quote, And I'll set up this new variable's value to target the quote variable. And I'll use the slice method to trim the quote. And the slice method will take two parameters inside of the parentheses. The first parameter is where I want the slice to start. And the second parameter is where I want the slice to end. And I'm putting the words start and end just kind of as placeholders. So looking at the quote variable, I do not like green eggs and ham. I do not like them, Sam, I am. I want the slice to start at the letter I and end at the period after ham. And since I is at the start of the string, the index number will be 0. So this is what my first parameter will be to start the slice. And if I console log revised quote, right now, I'll get the full quote as a result. So I'll now need to set the cutoff using what is available here. I have where the index of green eggs and ham is stored via the index variable. So if I console log that again, it was 14. So I can use this as a reference point on what index position to end the slice. So I'm going to add the variable index in as the second parameter. And if I console log revised quote again, I'll get I do not like. So the position of the end slice is not quite where I need it to be yet. I still need green eggs and ham plus the period. Still using what's available, I can adjust the end slice position by adding the substring variable and then using the length method to grab the entire length of the value stored here at substring. Essentially what index plus substring.length is doing is adding these index numbers together to get to the position I want. Again, if I were to console log index, the index number for this value is 14. And then if I console log substring.length, the index number is 18. So it's adding 14 plus 18 together to get the new index number. So if I were to console log index plus substring.length, it's 32, which is the new index position for the end slice. So now if I console log revised quote, I get I do not like green eggs and ham, but it doesn't print the period. So I'll just need to adjust the end slice position once more. And again, the only thing I'm missing here is the period. So I already have this part. So I just need to move it one position over. And for that, I'll just add 1. And now I'll console log revised quote again. And now it prints the full sentence. So that is how I was able to trim down the original quote from the original quote variable to just I do not like green eggs and ham. So if I did want to go ahead and test my solution in the live code editor here, I can just copy what I have here and paste it in. And looks like they print how many characters long the quote is, as well as the trimmed down quote. In the next task, strings 3, you are given the same quote that you ended up with in the previous task, but it is somewhat broken. We want you to fix and update it like so, and it gives the steps, and here's the live code editor, and I've already copied this variable over to the code editor. So same quote, I do not like green eggs and ham, but the casing is a little bit all over the place, so this task is to fix it. It says change the casing to correct sentence case, all lowercase, except for uppercase first letter, store the new quote in a variable called fixed quote. So I'm going to create the fixed quote variable. And all except the first letter of the string will need to be converted to lowercase. So first I'll set the new variable's value to the quote variable. And then I'll use bracket notation to access only the first character, which is I, which is stored at an index of 0. If I console log fixed quote, the output right now will just be the first character I. So now I'll need to add on the last part of the string, but all lowercase. So I'll use the plus sign for that. And I'll target the quote variable again. And then I'll use the slice method so that I can grab only the remaining part of the string. And I'm gonna set the parameter for this slice to 1. For this particular slice, I'm only setting the start parameter. So I'm using this syntax just to define a start because I want it to start in a certain place, which is an index of 1, and I want it to go all the way to the end. So in that case, I don't need to specify an end in this case. So now if I console log fixed quote again, it's still giving me the original string, but now it'll be a lot easier for me to convert this last part to all lowercase since I now have it separated out from the first letter I. For that, I'll use the toLowercase method to make this portion all lowercase. And I'll console log fixed quote again. And now the output is correct. Do not like green eggs and ham is now all lowercase. So step 1 is now complete. Step 2 says in fixed quote, replace green eggs and ham with another food that you really don't like. So I'm gonna assign a new value for the fixed quote variable on a new line. And I'm gonna set the value to fixed quote. And I'll use the replace method to replace green eggs and ham with a food that I really don't like. And for the syntax, the replace method takes 2 parameters. The first parameter is what is to be replaced or the pattern, and the second parameter is the replacement. In this case, both parameters will be strings. So I'll first set the first parameter to green eggs and ham. And now I'll set the second parameter to a food that I don't really like. Peanut butter. And now if I console log fixed quote, I get the replacement. I do not like peanut butter. Step 2 is now complete, so I'll move on to step 3. There is one more small fix to do. Add a full stop onto the end of the quote and save the final version in a variable called final quote. Essentially, this is to add punctuation to the end of the quote. So I'll create the final quote variable. And I'll use the template literal format to first assign this variable to the fixed quote variable. And then if I console log final quote right now, of course right now I still get the same output that's in the fixed quote variable because nothing has changed. So I'll just need to add my punctuation at the end and console log final quote again. And now I'm yelling, I do not like peanut butter, which is my desired output. And then just for fun, I can add in Sam I am, console log again. I do not like peanut butter, Sam I am. And there we go. And then as usual, if I also want to test out on MDN Sandbox, I can just copy what I have here, paste into the sandbox. And so it looks like it first prints out the fixed quote and then the final quote, which will vary. Mine is, I do not like peanut butter, Sam I am. Strings 4 is the final task. It says we have given you the name of a theorem, 2 numeric values, and an incomplete string. The bits that need adding are marked with asterisks. We want you to change the value of the string as follows. So I've already copied over the starting code from the live code editor here, and I've copied over just the parts that I'll be working with into the code editor. It says we want you to change the value of the string as follows. 1, change it from a regular string literal into a template literal. So the myString variable is set up using single quotes. So I'll update these to use backticks instead. And this now converts the string to a template literal. This next step contains 3 parts. It says to replace the 4 asterisks with 4 template literal placeholders. So I'll start with the first one, which is the name of the theorem. So here is where I'll place the first variable, theorem. I'll insert that here. And now that value is replaced. And then the next one is the 2 number values we have. So here is where I'll place the variable a, which is the first number value. So a. And then here is where I'll insert the second number value, which is b. If I console log my string now, I can now see the output of these values in the string. And so the only thing left to do is replace this one with the very last requirement. So for this last replacement, this one should be the length of the hypotenuse of a right-angled triangle, given that the 2 other side lengths are the same as the 2 values we have. So it says you'll need to look up how to calculate this from what you have and do the calculation inside the placeholder. Taking me back to geometry class, the formula for calculating the hypotenuse of a right-angled triangle is a squared plus b squared. And then take the square root of a squared plus b squared to get the result. So based on the values that we have here, so a is 5 and b is 8. So I'll enter these values here, and so the result should be 9.43. So I'll go ahead and set up the placeholder here, and in here is where I'll put in the calculation. For calculating the square root, I'll use the square root method, which is math.sqrt. And I'll put in the parameter, which will be what I need the square root of, which is a squared plus b squared. So I'll enter in the parameter, which is a to the power of 2 plus b to the power of 2. And these characters, this is called exponentiation, and it's an operator that returns the result of raising the first operand to the power of the second operand. So it could be any 2 numbers, and since I'm squaring these 2 numbers, I'm setting the second number to 2 to square the 5 and the 8. So now I'll console log my string again, and it now outputs the result of the calculation. However, a lot of digits appear after the decimal point. So I'll use the toFixed method to update this. And the syntax is toFixed, and then an optional parameter is the number of digits. It says the number of digits to appear after the decimal point should be a value between 0 and 100. So if this is not specified, it won't output any decimal places. As it says here, if this argument is omitted, it is treated as 0. So in this case, I'll set the output to have 2 digits after the decimal point. So I'll add in the method toFixed, and then 2 for the parameter. So now I'll console log my string again, and the output is now 9.43. And 9.43 is what I got when I Googled this as well. I could have also done this without editing the value of my string directly. So I'll revert it back to what it was originally. Instead, I could create a new variable, and I'll call it new string. And I'll set the value to equal my string. And then from here, I can just make the changes to new string. So now that I'm not updating my string directly, what I can do is use string methods. So for the replacements, to make these updates and replace the asterisk with the variables, their appropriate variables, I can set that up here. I'll create the replacement setup first, since I'll be using it multiple times. So here, I'll set up the first replace and put in what I'll be replacing, and I'll be using it 3 more times. So I'll go ahead and paste it 3 more times. And I'll quickly format this to make it look more organized. And now for each of these, I'll set the second parameter, which is the replacement. So the first is the theorem variable. The second is the A variable. The third is the B variable. And the fourth is the calculation. So I'll console log new string, and I get the same result. So it's just a different approach if I wasn't able to update the my string variable directly. So on MDN's sandbox, I can put in my first solution here. That's what I'll use to test in the sandbox. So I'll paste that in, and you can see that there is the desired output. So each variable's value is placed where it needs to be, as well as the calculation. So that wraps up the first video of this series. Hope you enjoyed, and see you in the next video.